Hello lovely people, I'm K3N and welcome to week 42 of our Slowstitch project for 2024. This week I want to do a little exercise which is very much inspired by Claire Wellesley Smith, and I've shown and talked about this book before here. This book is called Slowstitch, Mindful and Contemplative Textile Art. And this is the book that really crystallised for me Slowstitch and what it means and so on, when I first discovered it 10 or more years ago. So I just want to read you a little bit and show you this piece here. Now Claire has indigo dyed the edge of her piece of cloth. I'm not going to ask you to do that because I know you don't all have indigo vats, and in fact I don't have an indigo vat at the moment, but I'll talk about that in a little while. What I want to do is just read you a paragraph here from Claire, which says, "When beginning to stitch, I have been using a method that I find useful in getting to know my materials. This is a warm-up exercise of sorts. Using a plain woven linen fabric, I get to know the surface I have chosen by using only that material, to work on and to sew with. I gently remove a thread from the edge of the piece and thread up my needle with it, then re-stitch it into the body of the fabric. As a result, the fabric grows and shrinks simultaneously, and I am left with a more densely constructed section in the centre of the cloth on an unravelled edge. I can decide whether to pull threads out from the same place or to leave pieces between the rows of the warp threads visible. This method may seem counterintuitive. Why create and destroy at the same time? I think that for me it is a demonstration of exploring process for the sake of it. The end product is not the reason for doing it. Rather, it creates a headspace where I can think and yet be fully engaged with the material I am exploring, and this may lead to other creative ideas." So for me, the key from that is the end product is not the reason for doing it, that it creates a headspace to think and be fully engaged with the material, and also that it's a demonstration of exploring process for the sake of it, for the sake of the process, not creating a beautiful finished piece, although of course this piece is beautiful, but that wasn't the point. So that's what we're going to do. Now I have got you set up somewhat differently. Here's my lap. I'm sitting on my sofa with my legs up. Stella's by my feet down there. I just thought it might be a nice relaxing session to sit like that rather than sit at my desk. And all you will need, the only thing, well, you'll need two things. I'll just bring in my cushion. You need a piece of cloth, and I've got linen because I have linen, but I have also done this with cotton. Now ideally you want a plain cloth if you've got one. The only thing is you must be able to pull a thread from the edge. And you can do it just by going in with your needle and just pulling one thread out like that. And gently teasing it out. If you feel resistance, it's best to go back in with your needle and ease it, otherwise if you just pull on it, it might snap. And you just keep doing that until you've got a thread pulled out from the edge of your cloth. And it may be in the beginning you get some short ones like this, you know, that have got cut somehow. You can just put those in your orts, and so that you get a thread that's the full length of your cloth. So that's your thread to stitch with, that's your cloth to stitch on, and you need a needle. You don't even need scissors because, you know, we're working with short lengths. Now before I start, I just want to talk about this little piece of linen because, you know, I love the look of that indigo edge, because then as you take out the coloured, the thread from the edge that's been coloured and stitch it up here where it's not coloured, obviously that creates a visual effect and you can see your stitches better. It's optional. If you don't want to do it, you can just do it with just, you know, one plain piece of cloth. I'm going to insert here a little video of how I got this. I just dipped this edge in tea, this long edge, because obviously I want the long edge. I'm working on a rectangle to pull my threads from. So I'm just going to insert a little wobbly video here of me standing in the kitchen dipping this cloth in tea, just to show you what I did. So here's that coming up now. So I've got my little piece of linen, and I've got it, let me show you. Drop it in there, Catherine. There's my little piece of linen. So I've got it rolled up just so it fits in my container, or just loosely folded. And I want to dip the long edge in, because that's where I'm going to pull the threads from. So I've got it like that, and then I'm just dipping just half an inch or so of the long edge in the tea. And this is one Robos and one black tea. Any kind of anything, you know, anything that will give a bit of colour. We're not really dyeing here as such, we're just giving the edge of the cloth a bit of colour. And you will see that it wicks up, you know, it soaks up into the cloth, and that will depend on what kind of cloth you have. Mine is linen. So you just want to dip and lift it out. It's, you know, it's not really a step by step, it's just messing about really. Just getting a bit of colour in the edge of the cloth. And inevitably you'll get colour higher up, unless you put some kind of barrier there, or, you know, but we're not doing that. So just dip. And this tea is quite weak because my tea bags, like I said, are used, and I use them twice for tea. So I just do that for a little while until I get fed up, and then I will let it dry, and then I will rinse it, and then I'll let it dry again, just to let the tannin from the tea soak into the cloth and dry there before I wash it. So do this for as long as you've got the patience, and then let it dry completely, and then rinse it just in cold clear water, and then let it dry again, and then you're good to go. Okay, so I hope that was useful enough if you want to do that. And I'm going to have a sip of my tea. I've got normal tea, normal black tea. In England it's just called tea. And I've got a needle with a fairly big eye, because this linen thread is quite coarse. So you just need to match your, you know, the eye of your needle to your thread. And you might have to be gentle with your thread, because it's not designed for stitching with, it was designed to be woven. So it might be more liable to snap. And obviously you're going to work with a tiny little length, so I've just got a tiny little tail through the eye of my needle. And I'm just going to go in somewhere. Now you can either just stitch, or if you've got a fairly open weave, you can deliberately follow the line, you know, between two threads. I'm not going to make a knot, I'm just going to leave a tail. And I might take several stitches at a time and see how that works. Don't want to get caught around the edge. Obviously if you pull too hard you pull your tail through, so you have to pay attention to that. And just let the stitches lay on the surface of the cloth. Obviously the effect was more pronounced where Claire had dipped her edge into indigo, because that gave a much stronger colour. And you have that problem, like I talked about in the little video in my kitchen, where the cloth was dry, by the way, where the tea wicks up, you know, by capillary action, I believe it's called. But it's just gives a, you know, a little something extra if you feel like it. If you've obviously got dye baths laying about the place that, you know, cold water dyes, you could just dip the edge of your cloth into something. Be careful if you're going to use synthetic dyes or paint or anything like that, because it might be inclined to glue the threads together in some way, and then you won't be able to pull them out and they won't be nice to stitch with. So that's pretty much it. So if you just come here to find out what to do and then go away again, you're done. I don't think there's many of you that do that. So I'm coming towards the end of my thread. I'm just going to eke as many stitches out as I can. A shorter needle will give you more leeway than a longer needle. I'm coming right to the edge now, so what I'm going to do is load a few stitches till I get right to the very end of my piece of cloth. Make sure my tail's safely in the eye of the needle, and then just pull the last thread through. And that's my first line of stitching. Now I go back to the other edge and I pull out another thread, and repeat. And you're just paying attention to the material, to the feel of the cloth, to the way the thread behaves as you tease it out. It's got nothing to do with product. We're not making a pretty picture. We're completely concentrating on the cloth and the threads. And I've had this on my wish list to share with you since the very beginning. See that one, did it cut or was it just a shorter thread? So I'm studying, no, it was just a shorter thread for some reason. Is it? I think it was. No matter, we'll stitch it in. It's tiny. I'll just go with it. Yes, I've had this on my wish list, like I said, for some time, because it's an exercise I did the first time I read the book, when I first got the book. And I just found it really meditative and mindful. And not to have to worry about, you know, which colour thread shall I choose? What kind of stitching am I going to do? You know, you've just got one little scrap of cloth and a needle. Completely back to basics. And just examining the process of taking stitches through cloth. And one layer, which for me is already unusual. I get a few more out of that. And obviously you're restricted by the lengths of the threads that you pull. So, but you don't have to make a decision about how much thread to cut off your skein or your spool. Right, I think that's it for that one. And I don't know if it's showing up on the video, but let me just turn this cushion around because you've got the seam there and it's not smooth. That's better, I think. But there is a very slight colour difference between my tea-dyed threads that I've pulled from the edge and the background of the cloth. I'm here in natural light. If you've watched Park Home Life, you know how my living room's configured, so I'm sat on my sofa. Got the window to my right. So let's get the next thread out. And I've chosen to stitch right over here. I don't know how many threads I'll do before I call the exercise complete. But obviously you wouldn't want to stitch immediately here. Or you could, you know, you could stitch there and then you could start pulling threads from the other side if you wanted to. Just play, you know, just play. It's creative play. It's something that children know how to do, but we kind of lose it somehow as we become adults. We become much more focused on product. And that's a shame, I think. So I think through this whole thing that we call slow stitch, we can relearn that just joy in the creative process. I do think there was two threads, or there were two threads there. I'm going to go to the other end. Just be patient with it. It's just all part of the process. And now of course I'm concentrating, so I've stopped talking. You can hear the clock ticking, I think. Maybe Stella snoring. I think there was another thread from the last one that I pulled out. I think there is a vestige of a little length that's been left in there. I'm just teasing at it. Yes, there we go, you see. Do you see the other little bits remain of the rest of that other thread. I don't want to break this one, so I'm going to be super careful. If it breaks, but I'm going to do my best not to break it. See, there's another bit. So it's just really about just you and your piece of cloth and your needle. I'm just getting that thread out. There we go. There's little pieces away. And I just love the idea of this is the same, you know, it's all the same cloth. The stitching and the cloth are one. And there's an expression, isn't there, when you say about people who are alike, you say they're cut from the same cloth. And obviously that's very apt, I think. I think it's certainly apt here in our community, where we're all cut from the same cloth, you know, in that we're all interested in this mindful creative process. And in Friday's episode of Park Home Life, I recommended the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, which I've owned now for a few years and read several times. And every time I read it, I get something else from it. And I read it again recently, funnily enough, after having dismantled my wardrobes, which was something of a destructive process. But it was kind of destruction that was laying the groundworks for being creative by, you know, remaking my bedroom into a more comfortable space and so on. So I thought that it was apt to do this exercise this week, having talked about creativity and the nature of creativity. Now again, I'm nearly to my little end of my tail, so I'm going to take a few stitches onto my needle at once so that I can pull that whole piece through, just gently. And then I put my thumb on it. There we go. So I'm not making any knots, I'm not, you know, I'm not doing nothing other than stitching. Pulling my little thread out and then stitching with it. And what's also lovely is this beautiful fluffy edge that you create at the other side. And this thread is much finer than the previous one. More little fragments. So I really hope you enjoy this and like the simplicity of it. Oops. Put my tail back a bit. And I went down to the town this morning. I needed a few bits and bobs. Well, Fred had nearly run out of food. That would have been a disaster. So as I came out of the little local supermarket, there was a little girl playing hopscotch on the paving stone. She hadn't written the numbers on or anything, but you know, there's paving stones outside the supermarket. And she was playing hopscotch, a little girl of maybe 7 or 8. While her mum was putting the trolley away. And I remember playing hopscotch with my cousin when we were little, and we would chalk it out on the driveway. And you know hopscotch everywhere in the world. That's in case you don't, I'll explain. You never know if these things are universal or not. Basically, you draw squares on the ground. And so you have a 1, and then 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, like that, all the way to the end. And then you have a little, and you number them, and then you throw a stone onto 1, and a hop is on 1 foot, and a scotch is on 2 feet. So you have to miss the square with the stone on, go all the way up to the end, turn around, come back, pick your stone up, and back to home, and then you have to throw your stone onto the next number, and so on. That's how we used to play it. You'll have to let me know if you all know the game, and if you used to play it. But anyway, there was a little girl doing that outside the local supermarket, and just pull my thread through gently, and I remembered vividly watching her, myself and my cousin, hopscotching on the driveway 50 odd years ago, you know. And it was just lovely to see that this little girl in this age of computer games and, you know, fancy expensive toys and all kinds of other distractions, that she was just there amusing herself while her mum put the trolley back, having a quick impromptu game of hopscotch. And I just, you know, I just felt a connection. And that is childlike creativity, you know. You briefly find yourself having to wait as a child. Not all children are good at waiting, are they? And you have to amuse yourself. So you make up a game. And, you know, that's a game. Well, all you need was a piece of chalk, which sometimes you can find laying about, or something to make a mark. Or use paving stones that are already there, and a stone which you can usually pick up somewhere. Well, there's no point to hopscotch, is there? No point at all. I don't think there's even a winner and a loser. Well, not the way we played it, we just did it. It's utterly about the process of hopping and scotching and throwing your little stone and picking it up again. And, you know, I can remember making up all kinds of games when we were kids, and we didn't have anything. We just made up games with what we had. And I'm sure many of you were the same. Making dens in the woods, or games of make-believe, or hide and seek, or all those kinds of games. Only about the process. Again, I'm coming to the end of my tail, so I'm going to load my needle so that I can pull the last bit through. There we go. And feel how I've done my rows of stitching quite far apart. Oh, Stelz is dreaming. But I can always go back and stitch in between them if I want to. I'm also noticing that the threads are coming out easier now so far, and I don't know whether that's why, but it just happens to be that I had that one thread that was a bit fragile at one end that snapped, that was holding everything else up, or whether it's becoming easier because I'm deeper into the body of the cloth. You could also, if you wanted to, try, depending on your cloth, if the threads are sturdy, try pulling a thread out somewhere deeper in and seeing what happens. That's another possibility. And just experiment. You know, it's a little bit of cloth. This is some old sheet. You can just experiment. The end result is not important. And I know we've done a lot of projects, you know, making things beautiful, the way the end result is beautiful to look at. And I've said before, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not that you have to always make things that are, I won't say pointless, you know. You can be in the process of slow stitch, the meditative ethos of focusing on the process, and still make things that are useful and beautiful. It's just that you focus on the process while you're making and don't race towards an end result. And that thing about the end result, I think that's something that we pick up at one point. I don't know at what age it is. It maybe is different for everybody. Where, and this is something Liz Gilbert talks about in her book, where, I hope you can't hear my tummy rumbling, where, sorry, I've lost my thread now, haha, lost my thread. Yes, where expectation of result starts becoming more important than the joy of the creative process. And there's that danger if you're in a creative job, you know, a job that requires creativity, especially if you're relying on that for your income, then of course you have to have an outcome that's you know, valuable in that sense. She talks about that as well, and she says that she loves writing so much that if she hadn't been able to support herself as a writer, which she couldn't do until what she describes as the freakish success of Eat, Pray, Love, then she would have found another way to earn her living, but she would have kept on writing, even if nobody read a word, you know? And that is the love of the process. Even if you make art that nobody wants to look at, that nobody's interested in, or that you don't want to show it, you know? You maybe make things and never show to anybody. The creative process in and of itself has a value, has immense value, I think. And this little exercise is such a simple thing to do. You don't need any skills, you just need to be able to thread a needle and push it through the cloth. You could even, you know, you could use a needle threader if you've got nubbly thread and it's difficult to get through the eye of a needle. But apart from that, it's just simple tools. And feel the texture as well. Feel the difference in texture between, because it's all the same cloth, it's the same cloth, but here where you haven't stitched, you can feel the texture of that. Maybe even close your eyes and feel how that feels, and then go to where you have stitched and feel that. You can feel, I can certainly feel a very big difference between those two areas. It's engaging all the senses. We're so focused on colour and pattern, and you know, that's part of our makeup as human beings. When we're sighted human beings, when we're, you know, people who can see, that we often forget about the other senses. And working with cloth and stitch and thread, obviously the sense of touch is hugely important because of the different textures, and we've talked about texture before in different weeks, and we will be doing an exercise before the end of the year, much more focused on texture. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but it will be coming up. But yes, meanwhile, for this project, while you're only working with this one piece of cloth, just feel the difference in the texture between the stitched and the unstitched area. And just remind yourself that it's all the same thread. Everywhere is the same thread, but the feeling is different, and yes, indeed, the appearance is different. And you've changed the appearance of the cloth and the feeling of the cloth with nothing but what was already within the cloth. I think there's a metaphor there as well for what we have within ourselves. Do you see here as well? I'm showing you something. Do you see? Up this end, where I've been loading several stitches to get the last bit of tail through, do you see that there's more tension, so there's more rippling going on? Whereas down here, where I've only been taking 1 or 2 stitches at a time, there's much less rippling. Do you see there's a distinct rippled area up this end? So I'm just observing that about the process. That is not a mistake. There are no mistakes with this. That's just what's happening because of the way that I'm handling the threads and the cloth. I'm certainly not going to correct anything or change anything. The next one. Feeling a little bit of resistance, so I'm just going to go in with my needle. There we go. Just also be careful just pulling it through the eye of the needle. Linen's fairly sturdy, and cotton as well, and silk. I've even done this with, excuse me, I have another sip of my tea, with very fine silk, you know, normal silky silk, not silk noil or anything, but as long as you can put it through the eye of a needle and you're gentle with it, you can stitch with anything. Talking of needles and so on, while I am talking of needles and so on, Marion did a video recently that is brilliant in terms of, I mean, it's kind of not anything to do with what we're doing here now, but it was, I think it's called something like Embroidery Supplies What You Will Need. It's much less than you would think, something like that. I'll put a link below if you haven't seen it. Because she talks about needles, thread, cloth, scissors, you know. It's so informative, and I just think it's a brilliant video. It's all in one place. All those questions that you might have about what kind of needle to use for what and so on. But anyway, yeah, I'll put a link. It's a fabulous video. I quite like this pulling the needle through flat to the cloth with my left hand. I've been doing this up that end, kind of because that's what the process required, but I'm just observing it as a technique, just to do, not because it's necessary, but, you know, just because. Oh, I can't pull, there we go. Can I just about get back in to use that last bit? There we go. And of course this is a project that has no end. Well, it does have an end, obviously. You'll either run out of space or you'll run out of thread. But I mean, it's not like you're making a picture that will be done when it's done. Knobbly bit there. This is absolutely the kind of thing that would lend itself to a daily practice if you took a longer piece of cloth or a wider piece. I've talked before about a friend of mine and a colleague of mine in my textile group who sets the alarm, sets a timer every morning for 15 minutes. And she stitches kind of collage pieces onto scrolls, larger stitch meditation scrolls. But doing this exercise as a daily practice, just stitching for the sake of stitching for 15 minutes a day. Because you don't have any choices to make. Once you've got your piece of cloth and your needle, there was quite a big slub. I'm just gently pulling and it's gone through. So, you can just have your piece of cloth rolled up or folded up somewhere with your needle in it. And you don't have to worry about thread or scissors or pins or any of those other things. Just stitch. Just stitch for the joy of stitching. Like that little girl was just hopping and scotching for the joy of being out in the fresh air, waiting for her mum. Seeing the opportunity of square paving stones. And doing an impromptu hopscotch. I'm going to really push the cloth onto the needle at the end here. In kind of sashko style. And pull it through. I also love all these little tails here. Yes, I think when I was giving this some thought, usually what I do when I decide what I'm going to do for the week is I usually decide on sort of Friday or so, and then I have a day or so to think about it, to kind of let it sit in my head and as we say in Yorkshire, dwell on it. And I thought about how the resources are within the piece of cloth to create the stitch piece. It requires nothing external apart from a needle. It requires no other materials, and that's kind of, I think, an analogy even for ourselves about the resources that we have within us. That's what came to me in the night, or in the night, or in the middle of the night, because I was fast asleep in my cosy new bedroom, but as I was going to sleep. And how that can be surprising, and it may surprise some of you that you can stitch with thread pulled from cloth. I think there was an element of surprise for me when I came across it. I'd already done it before I read it in Claire's book. Someone else had talked about it. I have a feeling it was a colleague in another textile group I used to be in. And it just seemed to me such a powerful idea, that the resource lies within the cloth to make stitches into the cloth. I hope that makes some sense. It's quite difficult to put into words. But more often than not, when I read your lovely comments under the video, I see that you've got me. So I think that communication is a two-way thing. It's not only what I say, it's also how you take it, how you hear it. And you always come up trumps and hear and understand. And that is so meaningful to me to be understood, while it's meaningful to everybody. to be understood, isn't it? To be got. That you get me. I appreciate it enormously. I think I'm now, unconsciously, but now consciously, deliberately pulling up towards the edge here to get these ripples. I think I just observed myself doing that. I'm just loving this. I mean, often if I make a frayed edge, which I do sometimes, you know, for pieces, just to get the aesthetic beauty of the fluffy edge, and I put the little ends in the orts and they go for texture or, you know, other things, at the very least stuffing for something. But now when I know that I'm not destroying, I'm creating, or as Claire puts it, destroy to create, the pleasure in taking that thread out of there, knowing that I'm going to stitch it back in, is so satisfying to do. I think before, when I pull the threads out just to get the fluffy edge, I kind of feel a little bit destructive's not too strong a word, I think, but you know, like you're destroying cloth. I can't really explain it. Like you're being hard on the cloth just so that it pleases you visually. Whereas because I know that that thread I'm pulling out is immediately going to get stitched back in, just brings a nice cycle, a nice cyclical element to the pulling out of it. I feel like I can pull the thread out without feeling any sense of guilt or shame. Those words are too strong, but I'm sure you know what I mean. At least I hope you do. Okay. Oh, yes, other news. The person who originally came to quote me for the cap flap, who promised within 1 to 2 weeks, and today is exactly 3 weeks, I've not heard anything further from. So I've called somebody else who I saw advertised in a local free magazine, and he came the day I called him, and he's coming on Thursday to fit the cap flap. So I'm very pleased about that. Fred will be very pleased. Even if he doesn't want to go out, he doesn't like everything being shut, I've noticed, because it's been suddenly quite cold here, and I have a couple of times when I've thought, well, you're in for the evening, I'll close the bathroom window, you know, until bedtime, and then I'll open it again so you can get out in the night if you want to. Well, you're in for the evening, I'll go and close everything, but he gets upset. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like being shut in. He'll go to the bathroom and cry, and so I'll open the window, and then he'll sit on the windowsill and look out for a bit, and then he'll come back and lay back down on the sofa. But he seems to need to know that he can get out if he wants to. So I'll be very glad when the cat flaps in, and so will he. There we go. And today I have to go and collect the exhibition work from Simonsbury. Well, your today. I just talk as if it's, you know, your time, not my time. And then at the end of October, the last week of October, we've got another exhibition just for a week in Shaftesbury, in the art gallery in Shaftesbury in Dorset, and that will be a little bit different. That's all completely different work, and this will be not all textile, because some of us make other things as well as textile art, so it'll be all kinds of things. So if you're in the area, I will be there. I can't remember when. So the 20th, we hang it on the 22nd. I think I'm in the gallery on the 24th. I'll put the details down below in the description box. It's another week or so away, so I'll talk about it in future videos as well, with the facts to hand so that I don't tell you the wrong thing. Yeah, I nearly went then to pull through with my left hand, and then I changed and went back to my right hand. But I do like that feeling of pulling through with my left hand. I think it's kind of like if you stitch through it with an embroidery hoop, you know, you shuttle between your hands. Which isn't what I do at all. I nearly never use an embroidery hoop. Maybe it's because I've got this on a cushion on my lap. I don't know, there's just something that's making me do that. Maybe it's because then I'm not putting my hand in front of you if you're trying to watch me, which I don't expect any of you are watching at this stage. You'll all be stitching or knitting or crocheting or whatever, unless I ask you to look up. That was, I wasn't asking you to look up. If you looked up, I apologise. There's nothing to see here. Well, you know, nothing much has changed. Oops. But this is the kind of exercise I think I could just do forever. I really hope you enjoy it. I think as well it changes the quality of the stitch when I pull through with my left hand, somehow. There's little ripples in the surface of the cloth. But this is what I mean when I say really engage with the process. And don't worry, well, if you worry about it, then, you know, that's up to you. And if it really worries you, I was going to say don't worry about your lines being straight or the same distance apart or anything like that, but I don't want to be prescriptive, because telling neat people they have to be messy is equally as negative as telling messy people they have to be neat, and I don't want to do that. What I would say was, if it really bothers you to have lines that are too far apart, or you know, a varying width and stitching that's not perfectly straight, try and find a way within the process to make it work for you. So for example, you could, if you had a coarse weave cloth, stitch between two lines of woven thread, and that will keep you on the straight and narrow. I think drawing lines, I would really, I mean, if you really must, if you really feel that you have to, if you're uncomfortable if you don't have drawn lines to follow, then do so. But I would really, really say try to move away from that. Certainly for an exercise like this, which is about the process. Because focusing on a drawn line, it's kind of, it isn't, focusing on a drawn line. That can be process, I suppose. I'm kind of thinking as I go along here, in case you hadn't noticed. But there is an element of product to it, because you want your end result to be perfect and straight. And slow stitch is not about being deliberately messy and imperfect. I've said that before. It's absolutely not about that. It's all about process focus. But I think there's something about following a drawn line. It means you're saying to yourself, my stitching has to be perfectly straight, otherwise it's wrong. So that's why I say to you to try and find ways to leave that behind, to leave that mindset behind. And, you know I say here and there, embrace the wonky and all that, and not everybody can. You know, some people look at wonky and it really upsets them. You know, they find it visually upsetting. I hope that makes some kind of sense. You know, if you're one of those people that is really bothered by things not being straight and true, try and find ways within the process. So, for example, if you were stitching on a surface that was pieced, you could follow by eye a seam line with your stitching. And then once you've got that stitching line parallel to, or, you know, in some sense related to a seam line, or the edge of a piece of cloth if it's a collage or something like that, if you stay within quarter of half an inch, you should be able to eyeball that your line is relatively straight. And then once you've got that first line straight, that can become a reference point for the next line, and so on. You don't need to sit there with a ruler and pencil drawing yourself lines. I'm absolutely, of course, not, and it's not my place to forbid you to do it, and I certainly am not going to say if you draw lines it's not slow stitch. Absolutely, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just trying to encourage you to try and find ways, if you're one of those people, to find joy in your stitching and the process of doing the stitching, as well as the look of the stitching when you're finished, to, you know, shake off that desire for your work to look perfect. Think of that little girl playing hopscotch. I pulled that up really tight at the end. See, I'm doing that. I know I'm doing that deliberately. I'm kind of doing it semi-subconsciously because I'm talking to you. But I just love that ripple effect you get in the cloth. It always reminds me of the sand when the waves have gone out, you know. Yeah, no, the thing about the drawn lines, I feel like I banged on about it. I don't want anyone to feel, you know, told off or corrected, or I'm absolutely not here to do that. Hopefully if you've been here a while then you will know that. It's really just, I want to liberate you from it. That's my feeling, that's my motivation. Because I know it, I know that thing. I was like that. And I'm not like that anymore, you may have noticed. and it is truly liberating. So that's what I want to share with you, that feeling of liberation. The other thing is, if you really heavily stitch something, it always reminds me of a quote from, well, not a quote, but something my music teacher at school used to say. At school I was in a lot of amateur dramatics, and we do musicals and, you know, singing and dancing and so on, performances. So the music master was one of the people that was involved in that. And he very much liked the performance to be as good as you could expect from a load of 11 to 16-year-olds. Yeah, pressure. Luckily the other guy who worked with him was not like that at all, so there was some balance, but he would say, you know, and there'd be kids that really wanted to sing, that took great joy in singing, that wanted to be front and centre, you know, belting out the songs and so on. And in his opinion, the music teacher, they were not very good. their voices were not pleasing to hear. So he didn't want them in those roles. He wanted, you know, the kids that could sing in those roles. Could sing. Everybody can sing. Note to, you know, note to him. Everybody can sing. Now how you sing may vary, but we can all sing. Because you just sing, don't you? You just open your mouth and song comes out. Whether the notes are in the right place or in the right order or whatever is by the by. We can all sing. If we have a voice, we can sing. But he used to say, if you've got someone with, in his view, an awful singing voice, if you surround them with enough... I'm going to get back to stitching. I'll get there. Stay with me. If you surround them with enough people who can carry a tune without the help of a bucket, then their voice blends. Their voice is lost with the other voices. You know, it blends. So back to how do I relate that to the stitching? If you have one wonky line of stitching standing alone across the surface of cloth, you will see that it's wonky. But if you surround it on all sides with other lines of stitching, that might be still wonky, might be slightly less wonky, some might be perfectly straight, i.e. some might be, you know, pitch perfect, some might be more or less able to carry a tune, and some might be tone deaf. But if you put them all together as a chorus line rather than solo performers, the overall effect, on the whole, is pleasing. So that's how I relate that to stitching. I hope you followed that. I hope you're still with me. What is she doing now? She's gone off. She's completely lost it. No, it does make a kind of sense if you just think about it. So if you're stitching multiple lines of running stitch and one or two of them are wobbly, just stitch some more. I mean, I've said it before, so might get a mug with it printed on or a t-shirt or something. There's very little that can't be resolved with more stitching. Or words to that effect. I'll make it punchier before I commission the t-shirt. Stella's completely oblivious. She's had a little walk this morning. Well, she came with me to the supermarket. She obviously had to stay in the car, but she doesn't mind staying in the car. It's funny, she'll happily stay in the car, but she will happily stay at home as well once she's settled. But still at home, she's really clingy. I can't even go to the loo and close the door on her without her crying. Oh, there's a big slub there. You went through, so you must come back. There we go. Well, but in the car she's fine. And it's obviously a new to us car. It's not, I didn't bring it from France. But I go in the car and she just sits quite happily looking out the window when I go into the supermarket. Obviously it's cold now, so I wouldn't, of course, leave her in the car when it was hot. Well, that's why I took her down, because I didn't want to leave her home alone. I have left her a couple of times and my neighbour says that she does cry. So I'm going to have to get her used to that again. If you can hear that rumbling sound, it's not thunder, it's bin day tomorrow, so it's one of my neighbours putting the bin out. Love that fluffy edge. I also love that you can obviously see how much thread I've taken, because you see the length of the fluffy edge and how much cloth I've covered because I've left bigger gaps, obviously. But I mean, that's something else you could play with. You could cram all your stitching lines up really close together in a very narrow band. You could almost just go between every pair of woven threads. Ooh. What's happened? I won't go through, so I'm pulling it back gently. Whoops. There we go. You know, or vary it in some, vary the width between your stitching. Just play. There's really a little something, I think it's right at the end, in there. Excuse me. And don't forget to feel the texture of the cloth as well. I mean, in your hands as you pick it up, or lay it on the surface and run your hand over it. See if there's a difference between how it feels when you crumble it in your hand or if you lay it down and stroke it. There we go. Ah, do you know what that feels like, the way I'm pulling my needle through? It feels like when you weave. Now, I'm not a weaver. We have established this, because I, up until recently, couldn't even keep warp and weft straight in my head, what was what. So you all helped me by telling me weft is left. But I have seen weaving done. I've seen people doing weaving, and they weave through, don't they, with one hand and pull through with the other. I wonder if that's why I'm doing that. I don't know. I don't know. That's what I mean about engaging with the process. Just observe as well, you know. It is about observation as well as an observation of the piece, as well as your feelings. I mean, and you can have negative feelings. You might be sitting doing this thinking, what is she making us do now? Well, I'm going to do it because, you know, I've got 41 lovely pieces in my journal already and I need to put the 42nd in because otherwise there'll be a gap, but she's completely lost the plot. I don't think any of you are thinking that. I'm being a little bit facetious, but obviously some of you will, some weeks will resonate more with some of you than with others, and vice versa, and that's why I try to keep some variety. And I've really forgotten the beginning of this sentence now. What was I saying? I wish you could tell me one day. Yes, observation. Thank you. Thank you for shouting, I heard you. So observe that even if you're not enjoying it and you're thinking it's a pointless waste of time. I'm sure none of you are thinking that. But if you are thinking that, just examine that feeling. You know, why do you think it's a waste of time? Is it because you're not enjoying the feeling of it? Are you finding it maybe a bit fiddly and irritating to have to keep pulling the thread out? Are you missing some colour in it? Are you unthreading your needle accidentally like I just did? You know, are you finding it fiddly that you've only got a short bit of thread to stitch with rather than that extra bit of tail that we would normally leave to make our lives easier? That you haven't put a knot in the end, so you're pulling it through accidentally, and you might be finding that irritating. If you're having any of these negative emotions, those are all also valid emotions. It's not only about sitting here thinking, oh, this is so zen, I'm loving this, I'm just going to do this for forever. You know? Observation is observation. It's objective as it can be when you're also the subject. It's very difficult to be objective about yourself, isn't it, by definition almost. But I just invite you to just be aware of all those things, and even if it's with any project, not only this, you know, but with any project that you've done, even if you didn't like it, if you're someone who's done that, you know, I mean, there'll be some that pick and choose the ones they like and leave the rest, and that's obviously, of course, absolutely fine as well. I have to do them all. Luckily, I like them all because I chose them. I would be a bit silly if I chose things that I didn't like. But of course, I do like some things more than others, you know. There are some things that are at the core of my practice that I do all the time, that I love. And there are other things that are less so, but I've done them anyway, and in the spirit of presenting to you a course as, you know, as comprehensive as I can, while still being true to myself and being authentic. But, you know, I don't do molar every day of the week. It will maybe amaze you to hear. I don't do molar at all, but I do cutting away reverse applique, and I do raw edge applique, and, you know, I do all other kinds of applique. I just like saying applique because I know it makes some of you smile the way I say it. But there have been things that I've shared with you, like I said, that are absolutely at the core of my practice, and there have been other things that are less so. So if even I, who make all these things up, or, you know, select these things to share with you, find some things less enjoyable than others, then you all can't possibly be expected to find them all enjoyable. You who have no choice but to, you know, if you've committed to the weekly projects. Anyway, that was a lot of wittering. One of the things I do really want to thank you all for is, yes, indeed, wittering. When I first started using the word here, has negative connotations. It kind of means going on and on about something to no end, you know, with words with no value, superfluous amount of words, or that kind of thing. I think that I now have K3N license to witter 007. Sorry, I just thought of it. No, I was just going to say you've given me license to witter, and then I thought of James Bond. Anyway, shaken not stirred. Now that'll learn me, because now I've got my thread all. I pulled at it too harshly, and now it's got snagged. There we go. No, but that wittering has just become part of me. But a positive part that you all like, and that's, yeah, that means so much to me. You can't know, I know I keep saying it, but I really want you to all understand how much you mean to me. I really, really, truly do. You keep saying it to me in the comments, which is lovely. You know, what a difference I make and how much I mean to you and so forth. But it's, if that is true, then it is equally true in the other direction. It's mutual. It really is. The other thing that's interesting that I've just observed, of course, is that usually and I comment on it even. I do take one stitch at a time. But with this, I'm taking several. And it began, I think, back in the beginning here. When I got towards the end, because of the short length of the thread, you have to take a few stitches on your needle at once. Otherwise you can't, you know, there's no leeway in the thread for you to be able to get the needle in and out otherwise. But there's no need for me to do that up here when the thread's still relatively long. So apparently I'm doing that for some other reason. And I think it's to do with how it's making the stitches look. And it's much more in the spirit of Seshko and of course also the Cantha running stitch. I do want to look more at Cantha before the end of the year. Well, if we don't get to it before the end of the year, there's always next year, because I'm not going anywhere. As long as you're here happy to watch and listen to me, I'm not going anywhere. Because Cantha is much more than running stitch, done in parallel-ish lines. Anyway, okay, let's have a look. I think since I've more or less covered my cloth and I'm up to where the real dark tea dyeing is, I think I'm going to call that enough for that. And I'm going to have a look at the other side. Oh, look at the other side. Now do turn your work over. That's something else you could do if you haven't been doing this with me and now it's too late. Well, you could do it again. You could stitch from one side and then the other and see if that makes a difference as well to your stitching. I hope you can see, I'm looking through the camera, the little ripples in the surface of the cloth. I just love it. It's only really about texture. I mean, you can see the texture if you're someone who can see, of course, but if you close your eyes and feel the texture, it just feels wonderful. And the fluffy edge as well. Just feel the texture of that. It's just a beautiful little thing, and it's all the same cloth. And the way that this end here, where I've left the little short tails sticking out, they're quite sort of spiky looking. They're obviously soft because they're linen, but they've got a spiky look to them. So you could imagine how they might feel, you know, if they were spiky. Do you see what I mean? Whereas this end, they're much more sort of wild and woolly. And if you just feel those, they feel completely different to here, where you've got this regular fluff, because it's the weft threads that are all laying, you know, virtually the same distance apart and are all the same length. So just explore all that in your little piece. Just sit with it for a while and explore it and feel it and look at the stitching in a completely non-judgmental way, you know? It's a little scrap of cloth that you've spent some time with. Just feel it and look at it if you can, and stroke it and examine it from every angle. And I really, really hope you enjoyed the process of that. I'm now going to go and take a photograph of it, and then I'll get my journal. I'll be back to put it in my journal with you and tell you the quote I'm going to use. Back in a moment. Okay, I've done my photograph and I've also stitched it on because I thought the video was running and it wasn't. Luckily I realised. Anyway, so date and sign, and then I'll tell you the quote. It's the 14th of the 10th. This is not a very good pencil. 24. But I'm going to go over it all again in pen at the end of the year. K3N and a kiss. And my quote is from Vincent van Gogh. That's how we say it in English. In the States, I believe you say Van Gogh. He was Dutch. He would have said Vincent van Gogh with some ch. Anyway, his quote is, and it applies to everything, he said it about painting. By the way, before I tell you the quote, I just must say that I have stood in front of one of there were 5 versions of the sunflowers in a vase, you know, the very famous image that is somewhat ubiquitous. It's on posters, t-shirts, mugs, mouse mats. Do they still have mouse mats? You know, everything. It's so, you know, we're all so aware of it, aren't we? But I actually stood in front of one of the, I think he's done 5 versions of it in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and I was moved to tears, because when you see the actual one with the brushstrokes on canvas, wow. Anyway, that's an aside. So what did Vincent say? He said, if you hear a voice within you saying you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. So that's what I'm going to write in my journal with this pencil that you can't read. If you hear a voice within you saying you cannot paint, then by all means, and I put the emphasis on the word all advisedly, by all means paint. Stitch for us, and that voice will be silenced. Because to me that just speaks to process. I'm just going to put Vincent because that's how he signed himself. So there we go. So that was week 42. So we went from Claire Wellesley Smith, a little bit of Elizabeth Gilbert, and we ended with Vincent van Gogh. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a very pleasurable time stitching your own little piece. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more Cloth Tales. Bye bye.